Known as the philosopher's historian, Diogenes Laertius preserved much of the wisdom and ideas of ancient Western civilization. Combining historical facts with comical anecdotes, avoiding speculation or projecting his own opinions and theories, without his book, truly little would have survived the Dark Ages. Diogenes Laertius Prologue. Diogenes begins his book by stating that some people believe that philosophy originated among the barbarians. That philosophy is something that the Greeks and Romans inherited or imported. On this question, he enters a brief and focused summary of ancient history as was known to him. By ancient, I mean what would be to us prehistory. First, he states that some Egyptians believe the god Hephaestus, the Latin Vulcan, to have been the father of philosophy. What is more, that the god lived on Earth almost 50,000 years ago since the present. Then there is mention of Zoroaster, the key religious figure in the ancient Magian or Persian culture. Allegedly, they date his life to merely 6,000 years before the time Diogenes is writing. LOL. Of course, now we date Zoroaster to about 2,000 years before the fall of the Roman Republic. Attempting to disprove the Persians' religious chronicles, he segues into other barbarian societies and their similar claims. He takes issue with the Thracians' argument that it was Orpheus who began philosophy. Funny enough to quote, he says,
"I hardly know whether he ought to be called a philosopher. For what are we to make of one who does not scruple to charge the gods with all human suffering, and even the foul crimes wrought by the tongue amongst a few of mankind?"
I say it is funny, as such a practice, blaming divinity for all evil, became common during the Dark Ages. The historian does explain the philosophical views of Zoroaster more charitably. He almost commends him for believing in the immortality of the soul and the belief in a dichotomy of good and evil. Along the way, Diogenes criticizes Herodotus, or says that some criticize him, as the Persians, being Zoroastrians, would not have done some of the things the historian describes. Either way, eventually, he says,
The first to use the term, and to call himself a philosopher or lover of wisdom, was Pythagoras. For, said he, no man is wise, but God alone.
This segues into a genealogy of the term in which Diogenes does not describe the parallel term sophist in a negative light. Then he names his own list for the wise men of antiquity, his Antiquity.
The men who were commonly regarded as sages were the following: Thales, Solon, Periander, Cleobulus, Chelon, Bias, Pittacus. To these are added Anacharsis the Scythian, Myson of Chion, Pherecydes of Syros, Epimenides the Cretan, and by some even Pisistratus the tyrant.
Remember that these men lived in a nearly mythical past, well before the likes of Socrates or Herodotus. Now we arrive at an original classification of all the philosophical schools or general viewpoints. The schema divides all philosophy into two main groups, the Ionian or Greek and an Italian or Latin. He starts the Greek with Anaximander and his teacher Thales of Miletus. Likewise, he starts the Latin with Pythagoras and his teacher Pherecydes. Allow me to interject that the student-teacher pairing is key in such a claim. After all,
a student repays his teacher poorly if he always remains a student.
Meaning, philosophy requires criticizing the teacher, not merely following a teacher's teachings. Curiously, Diogenes also provides an end to the line of philosophers. He says that the Greek line ends with Varius, while the Latin ends with Epicurus. What is most peculiar is that he would speak of an end. Since he is writing in the middle of the 3rd century, it is entirely plausible that he knows or suspects the coming of the Dark Ages. Continuing about his classification, he pays the utmost homage to Socrates. Much as it still stands, he regards the executed philosopher as the beginning of moral or ethical inquiry. On this point, he says philosophy may be divided into 3 branches. One branch begins with Plato and ends with Clitomachus, the latest leader of the Academy. In the second branch, he mixes Antisthenes, the founder of Cynicism, and Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism. Lastly, the third branch of philosophy after Socrates begins with Aristotle and ends with a certain Theophrastus. Returning to the original two groups, concerning the Italian philosophers, he includes the likes of Parmenides, Leucippus, and Democritus, to end with Epicurus. As such, let me say, this is not so much a conceptual classification. As far as concepts are concerned, the philosopher says that a fundamental division is dogmatism and skepticism. Dogmatists assume things can be known, while skeptics believe that all must ever be doubted. Furthermore, all philosophy may be divided into three areas of interest. These are the now ubiquitously agreed upon physics, ethics, and dialectic or logic. Diogenes implicitly lets it be known that he will focus on ethic as he provides a tenfold classification of ethical positions, schools, or viewpoints. I will not read the names, but rest assured, understanding these schools or sets of opinions is what Diogenes' book is all about. Therefore, if you do not know them, don't worry. I should mention, Diogenes also provides somebody else's classification. So, he admits that this is all debatable, which is a most commendable admission. To end his prologue, he mentions how during his own life a certain Padamo of Alexandria has attempted to create an eclectic school. This, as the name suggests, attempted to merge the study of all the schools. Yes, things are easier when there are not multiple possible correct answers, LOL. I always wish to end each section of my summaries with aphorisms that occurred to me as I read the work. Since Laertius yielded nearly 100, I gift you 5 that hopefully represent the diverse topics found in his book.
Folly is not ignorance or even intemperance, but the unwillingness to accept refutation.
The truest romantic love is always caught by surprise.
The most charming tend to be those that talk to themselves, as not even themselves tire of their own company.
The reason people give money to those suffering from illness and accidents but not to philosophers, is because people fear that they themselves might one day be sick or injured, but not that they themselves might one day be intelligent and wise.
There are two kinds of liars, those who wish to change others' opinions, and those who wish to change their own memory.